Welcome to IT Jetpack by Instant Housecall, episode number 7. Thanks for watching and subscribing to the show. If you like IT Jetpack, tell your friends and share the videos on forums and social media. If you're looking for remote support software, try Instant Housecall at instanthousecall.com. I'm your host, Jeff Hallish. Guys, if you would do me a favor and join the chat now at itjetpack.com to share ideas with other techs and business owners during the show. You'll find the chat to the right of the video. We've heard all the name calling independent techs are trunk slammers, man in the van, pizza techs, and Johnny Ponytail, which is my all-time favorite. Are they really hacks or just a scapegoat when business slows? Joining us today, we have the man in the van himself, Marvin B. And on the other side of that coin, we have two illustrious CEOs, 8-Bit Barry Campbell and Channel Chief Chad Kemp. Scott Young is also here, a 64-bit MSP from Flexity, along with corporate shill Pierre Roman from Microsoft.
Corporate shill.
And the man whose name makes fun of itself, Corey Fruitman from Instant Housecall. All right, now that we have all the name calling out of the way, let's talk like adults. All right, good to have everybody here today. I think we've got these things with talking about independent techs and are they ruining the market. And we're going to talk about those things today. From Barry or Chad, how are independents, in your opinion, spoiling the market?
Barry, you take that first.
Yeah, because if we let Chad start talking, I might never get to speak. But I don't know that they're ruining the market. In our market, certainly they are. They tend to be driving down the average income per client. With lower overhead, obviously they have lower costs, so they charge a lower price. But on the flip side of that, they're also very limited in what they can do and the things that they can offer and how they offer them.
Okay.
Well, I see there's two sides to the coin. On the one side, we have the independent techs that are promising to deliver services that are comparable to what actual MSP or larger businesses are offering. And when they fail to deliver those, the customers get a bad taste in their mouth. And unlike lawyers or doctors or other industries, although we have certifications, there's no real board-certified standard saying that you're a good tech or you're going to be able to deliver what you say. And there's not really an accountability board for that. You're not going to get reported and kicked out of your association. So because of that, we sometimes go into clients where they've had such a horrible experience, the amount of damage control we have to do and cleanup is exemplified way beyond what it should have been. On the other side of the thing, we do see the people that are on certain internet forums offering extremely low rates and things like that, and then they're setting an expectation that the service doesn't have a lot of value. Even if the service they're delivering is different than what we're able to deliver, sometimes the customer can't see that until it's either too late or basically influential.
Now, talking about the market though, how does that affect your guys' business as far as the independent techs and what they're doing specifically? I mean, is it other than yes, maybe sometimes they're charging lower prices, but I think there's independent techs out there. And maybe Marvin, why don't you answer this question? What, from your standpoint as an independent tech or a man in a van, as we're going to call you, what types of things do you think that you bring to the table, that for your customers that make it, because obviously you're not one of those people that's charging, yes, you have a lower overhead, but you're able to do the same types of things as some of the MSPs.
Well, I think if we're talking about just simply the market, I think that there's different markets that we're talking about, and for a lot of the larger corporations, MSPs, they're looking at core businesses that have X number of employees, X number of machines, and then you've got the other side of that where you've got a lot of independents that are simply doing residential, or they've got a storefront that they're trying to maintain. And where I see, at least myself right now, I'm kind of in the middle, where I'm doing a lot of businesses. I still do some residential, but for a lot of independents, that are doing things the right way. We're stuck in the middle where we're getting hammered, from the trunk slammers that are, charging the really, really low rates, and then we come in and they think we're the same as them, and then we're hit from the larger corporations because we can't deliver the same level of service that they can, and it's a lot of it's perception. But in terms of market, it really depends on what you're targeting as your customer. And I believe that for most of the good independents, we're kind of in that middle where we're targeting a market that's not just simply the residential or the small business with 1 or 2 employees. We're targeting the businesses that, are going to have 1 or 2 servers, 3 or 4 maybe, up to 50 users for some of us, not all of us. And I think the large corporations and MSPs are looking for bigger businesses where they can get, a decent return on their investment when they're, trying to manage, 100, 200, 300 systems at a time.
Well, what about even things like keeping up to date with security issues? Like if you just pick on firewalls, there's so many things that come out on a daily basis that if we didn't have a guy just focusing on firewalls, how would he be able to keep up with firewalls, servers, backups? I mean, the list goes on. I mean, without listing out everything we do, one of the problems we found with independence is if you try to do all these different things, you end up being not good at any of them. You end up being mediocre at best. How does that not affect the customer? Again, back to the customer not knowing any better. You say you're good at it, they just assume you're good at it. And they take you at face value, and then we go in and find horribly configured firewalls, servers that are set up very lazily, like allow everything type of permissions, just because that's fast and easy.
Well, I think you're dealing with, the independents that are just simply out there trying to get as much business as they can, charge the lowest rates. They're not going to be the ones keeping up with that sort of stuff. For me and my business, I do, but part of it's because I tend to focus on only the things that are necessary for my customers. I do focus on, only specific types of software. I do focus on, I've narrowed down my products to, I'm only supporting, one, suite of firewalls. I am only supporting, a couple of different antivirus packages. The difference, I think, can be is that for independents that do it right, they're getting to the point where they can partner with vendors that will help support them so that they can stay on top of that stuff and not be the trunk slammer that's running down to the local box store to get whatever the cheapest thing on the shelf is to get their customer up and running. It takes.
I like that. I like how you're saying you partner with them, and we've come into that a lot of times. And even us, at the size we are, we don't try to do everything. We partner with companies for structured cabling and phone systems and some other stuff, just because again, can't be all things to everyone. But one thing that I can't help but wonder is, there's only so many hours in the week you can bill for. How many of those hours do you give up in order to try to stay on top of firmware and exploits on the firewalls you do support, and all the Windows server updates, and I'm saying Windows, but maybe support Linux, the Linux server updates, all those different exploits and everything. How much time do you spend staying on top of that? And then new emerging technologies. I don't want to use words like cloud, but I just did. So how do you stay on top of all those things when there's just so much stuff happening, and you only have so many hours in a day?
Yeah, basically the same as you guys. I struggle, to fit the hours in. Even if you had, people dedicated to that, you still got to have that person translate what they've learned out to the rest of the staff. So you've got trainings that you've got to deal with and stuff like that. I do the same thing where, I do dedicate, a couple hours here, a couple of hours there. I may stay late to do a webinar with a vendor. Ask them to do a special hands-on training with me or walk me through an initial setup. But I think the difference for me is, I'm not trying to, scramble to support 100 different clients. I've got my clientele down to, at least for me, what a manageable number is of the people I'm supporting on a, daily/weekly basis versus customers that I may see once or twice a year. It's hard. I'm not gonna lie. the wife doesn't like that, Saturday night I may be sitting here, watching a video, learning something, but that is the choice you make, being an independent and staying an independent, which is what I did.
Well, Marvin, you basically seem to push on that really hard yourself. Now, how about, do you see other independents in your market? Do you come in and see the same things we do, where you're cleaning up after amateur hour?
Oh yeah.
And how do you sell yourself to the customer if you're coming in after another independent? Like, one of our things is we'll say, don't worry, Mr. Customer, we have a network guy, we have a Windows Server guy, we have these things. Unfortunately, the previous guy didn't seem to have a full skill set, and I'm sure he did his best, but I'm sorry, you're in a terrible way right now. How do you reassure them that you're not terrible guy number 2?
Well, I think the way to do that is to simply distinguish what separates me from, let's use the lack of a better word, the hack, who, yes, he likes computers, yes, he's toyed and played with computers, and yeah, I can help you do that and save you some money, but when it comes time to, truly set up a network or truly set up a router, and they run down to the store, they're just not doing those types of things. So when I've come in and cleaned up after, and I'll be honest, I've cleaned up after independents and I've cleaned up after companies. The difference is I can come in and say, look, I am certified partner with these companies, and I'll list out the companies. The servers and desktops that I sell them are from names that they know, and it is set up in a way that I'm going to sell them, I'm going to support them, but you're also going to get support from the vendors as well. So if for some reason I can't fix that server, here's a number that you can call them. They'll send out a tech to take care of that. And I can basically let them know that I've got relationships with these partners, with these vendors, that the other techs don't have. If the other techs are just coming in and just, yeah, I can support what's at the local store that I can get off the shelf, that's simply not enough. Another relationship that I can say that I have is that I have relationships with other consultants for those businesses, and I'll use the legal industry, where a big chunk of my customers are. I don't claim to support their software, their case management systems. There are consultants that can do that for them. I may know a little bit of stuff. I'll know how to install them. I'll know how to do, a little bit of support. But if there's truly an issue inside the software, they have the software consultant that they can call. I work directly with the consultant, so if I do need to do stuff on site, I can be on the phone with them. They'll direct me how to do it. It's all those relationships where I tell them, I have relationships with the vendors, with the consultants, with the software people. I have other techs that I can draw on, techs that will support me if I need to. If I want to take a vacation, I gotta let them know that there's somebody else that can come in and support their systems. Those techs come with me. They meet the customer. They know the systems. It's those types of things that I bring to the table that the bulk of independents may not do, but they may be trying to, and they're just not getting there. So, one of the things that I've been trying to do is to basically let independents know, listen, if you're going to play in this game, you got to come with the right, mindset, the right game skills, the right tools. Otherwise, you're bringing us all down.
So what happens when your phone rings twice? What happens when 2 of your clients have issues at the same time? How do you handle that?
Depends on what the issue is, but for the most part, I have an assistant that will answer the phone and let them know I can get back to them, as soon as I'm done. Most of my clients understand that for the majority of work that we do, I'm the guy. In full disclosure here, there was a time a few years back where I did have techs work for me, so I'm not out of line here, but I did have techs that I could send out to take care of stuff. But now it's back to being just me. My customers know that, and obviously if it's emergencies, they know I can only handle one emergency at a time, and I will do my best to make sure that the biggest emergency gets taken care of first. The only time I really have to worry about that, hurricane season. everybody's out of power at the same time. Obviously, I can't get to all of them, so I get to them as I can. They know that. The customers that are not happy with that, well, they're going to be the ones that I'm going to either, move them to another company that can give them that, where they've got a fleet of techs, or something like that. So at least I know my limitations. My customers, we have sometimes, there'll be 7 or 8 clients waiting on a callback in a day. Mondays are a horrible day for me because the calls are just going to stack up. But if they're in a business and they've got one person that can't work, they work around that as best they can. If a server is down, then obviously my day is shot. Calls go out to all the other customers. Your install is going to have to wait a couple of hours till I go fix that. It's just the nature of being an independent.
And Barry, I think with that being said, too, I think a lot of companies, even companies of your size that are scaling up, I think they run into the same problems. There's always a point, and I believe every business on both sides of the fence has pain points. Now, none of us like to talk about those pain points because they're ugly and they're not fun, but the reality is they're there, and we just have to deal with them differently. And I will say this, after talking to hundreds of businesses and technicians and things over the last couple of years, there's a lot of people out there that a lot of customers will say something is an emergency, and I'm going to tell you that probably 90% of the time it's not an emergency. To them, it absolutely is an emergency, but for us out there, yeah, okay, you can live without that. Now, server down, house on fire, whatever, those types of things are important. But other than that, I mean, most people, if you don't have a plan set up in place where if somebody's server goes down and they can be back up and running and doing their day-to-day tasks, then it's a loss anyways. So, you've got to be able to have those things in place, I think, that will help you mitigate the problems as they pop up. So that's kind of the way I see it from both ends of the market. Scott, I want to ask you, because you're from the total opposite end where you have a large MSP, and you guys are doing a lot more things. Now, let me ask you, the first question is, any of these guys out here, Barry, Chad, Marvin, are they even in your market?
No, not really.
So you're kind of, because of the size of the MSP that you guys do things a little bit differently, and you target a different market out there, right?
Well, to clearly divide right off the bat, we've never and do not touch right now help desk or even desktop type of support.
Okay.
We would put that to another company. In general, we manage infrastructure and network, system storage, voice to the OS level with certain infrastructure applications included, such as large deployments of, say, Exchange, maybe large web farms, things like that.
From Barry and Chad's standpoint, or even Marvin, is the things that Scott's doing is his larger MSP. Are those ever going to be your customers, the ones that he's dealing with?
We have some clients that are very large, but generally speaking, we're supporting either a subsection of that environment, or we are supporting the internal support people.
Okay.
So we've got one client that's 90,000 desktops, but we're supporting one group within that, and we're supporting the support team that's there. So
now let me ask you guys this, because one of the things that irritates me about this conversation in general, and we're having a good conversation back and forth here. I love it, but one of the things that irritates me is that there are people in the industry that will sit here and say this is the only way. And I think with the differences of businesses we have here, I'm going to say that there are many different ways, and I don't want to say to skin a cat because some people might be offended, but anyways, there's many different ways to do something in your business, and I think there's different customers for different businesses. We're not all, because here's a lot of times, even in my small independent, mostly residential business, my customers, I want to have a good relationship with them from my standpoint. And if I don't have a good relationship with them, it's not worth me taking the time and effort to work with them, just to be honest. but I can cut down and only work with the people that I want to work with. And I would think even from all your guys' standpoints that you could also do that too. You could scale to a certain size. You could say, okay, we're only going to deal with these, good customers that, hey, when we say, listen, we want you to, spend a little bit of money on hardware that's going to protect you better and do this and that and the other, that those customers go, okay, yeah, we'll do that. Instead of sitting there trying to, make them do something that they don't want to do. Sometimes that can be very painful, and quite honestly, I'm not even sure it's worth the effort.
Jeff, one thing for us is on the note about the larger customers like Scott's supporting. Scott's building these huge environments, and we're not competing to build those environments, but we support some of those larger environments. Right. I think our biggest customer has just under 1,000 users, and we support a very small piece of that. In fact, we might be supporting something that Scott built, but we don't do the architecting and everything. That's a different level. But I think as we get into the bigger clients, which we do have a fair number of, that is what it is. You go in and you engage on a specific thing that you're very good at. You don't go in and do everything. For our, we'll call it under 100-seat clients, where they only have a handful of servers and then they've got a bunch of desktops, laptops, this and that. With those guys, I mean, you can go in, you can support everything under one roof, and that's not a problem. But when you get bigger, there's just a lot of pieces involved. And I'm not saying somebody couldn't support it all. It's just a lot of times for accountability, they don't want one person to have it all. A lot of times they seem to like somebody to build it, somebody to procure it, somebody to install it, somebody to support it, and et cetera. And that's what I was talking about earlier when I was picking on Marvin a little bit there, in a friendly way, I hope, about training and things like that. Is that we wouldn't be able to be as good as we are at our firewall support if we didn't have a guy dedicated on it, and our guy that's cross-trained on it, he's about as good as I would expect somebody to be who is an independent, because it's not his full-time job. He just spends some time doing it, and the guy that spends all his time keeping up on it, we're able to do a lot of escalated support, which Marvin mentioned that he was partnering with people anyway to do that, which is awesome, and that is what you have to do. And like I said, we do that when we're outside of scope as well.
Yeah, I think. Sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I think there's a really, really important point here that goes across everybody who's spoken. And there's two things that you have to define. Doesn't matter who you are, how big you are. You have to define your market. So once you figure out who you want to sell to, that decides what your business is. For Marvin, for his clients, they want the things that he's offering. And for the rest of us, we're in the same situation. And then we need to establish value. We need to make sure that our value is unique and what we're selling is something that differentiates ourselves from everybody else that's in our same place.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, and that's kind of the points I was getting at. Was there's different customers for different businesses, and it's kind of building that relationship and being able to support them at whatever level that they want to be supported. Because not everybody, and there's a lot of small, medium businesses, they're not willing to. Their IT budget is like nothing, because they don't really want to. I don't know. They don't want to spend the money in the IT department, because a lot of the stuff that we do is stuff that's not seen. So even going back to Chad talking about the firewall, I mean, in my opinion, and I could be wrong on this, if you set up a firewall or a network connection properly, what types of things do you really have to go back in and mess with on a regular basis that somebody can't just pop in and fix when something goes wrong with that particular firewall?
We see exploits being launched all the way from basic models all the way up to enterprise carrier grade stuff. And are they all important to every customer? No. Some of them won't affect certain customers depending on what they have enabled. But I mean,
connection.
You can't tell people that you're securing their network and then have large vulnerabilities sitting there that you installed and are ignoring.
Regular basis. My opinion. That somebody can't just. Oh, somebody's got some feedback going on there. I'm not sure who that is. Yeah. So as far as so I mean, Marvin, as far as your clients, obviously you're working with law offices and different things in that industry. How are your customers protected to the point where there's really not any issues?
Well, of course not. I mean, there's not a 100% guarantee on that, but I think that what happens is, for my customers, I'm doing some of the stuff that Chad mentioned with those particular customers where I do have to manage their firewall. They've got services where they've got gateway antivirus, gateway intrusion prevention. They've got internet content filtering. Those aren't things you're just going to get from a router down at the box store. And they're not going to, those box store routers aren't going to work for my customers. They need those protections in place. Let me just go back and make a little bit of distinction, what I think we haven't done earlier. Part of what the independent tech is fighting is when we step, in a sense, over the imaginary line of providing the same services as some of these other companies. For lack of a better term, if we just say generically MSPs, where we start utilizing some of the same services to, do monitoring and alerting and manage antivirus and stuff like that. The biggest thing I think that happens is that if those larger companies, for some reason start slowing down in their business or they lose a customer to somebody like me, we get grouped into a big hot mess of independent hacks, and it's almost like, why don't you guys get back over to the kiddie pool and leave this stuff to us? And that's where I think there is a place for the independent tech, and there's even levels of independent techs. Those that are handling the residential, really, really small businesses. There are independents like me that can handle some decent sized businesses, maybe not to the level that others would. I mean, I'm sure, I've got 2 customers, that are 100 plus users. I don't support everything from them, and like they were saying, I support, one part of their infrastructure, and I work with their internal techs to do that. But for the most part, I am the network administrator for those companies. So that's where I was trying to make the distinction of, there's a place for us. We're all trying to do the same thing. Don't be trying to smack us back to the kiddie pool.
Well, and I think one of the things that I don't really care for is that people will look at a scaling a business and they'll say, we need to hire employees. Now, to be honest, I've looked at it from both sides, and maybe you can talk about this, Marvin, a little bit, but I'm sure that there's a lot more that goes into hiring and firing your employees on a regular basis. Because let's face it, the numbers that I'm seeing out in the market right now are showing that a lot of these technicians that are being hired are making minimum wage. And quite honestly, I don't care who you are, human being, you're only going to work so hard for minimum wage, or even a little bit above minimum wage. It's the way it is. So I would imagine that there's a turnover in a lot of this industry where people are coming in, coming out, and I think part of the, Barry and Chad, you can speak to this, but how do you keep the training flow going as you're bringing in new people? And maybe you guys specifically don't have this problem. I just know a lot of businesses that do. And so how do you deal with the whole customer, dealing with employees? Because obviously that's got to be somewhat of a headache. It can't be perfect all the time.
It is not perfect all the time, that's for sure. Processes, documentation and processes. Those are the 2 pieces that you really have to have. Because it's not all up here. It can't be all up here.
Right. And that's fine, but here's the thing is, even with processes in place, if somebody's leaving and you're going to hire somebody and they're coming in, there's still you've got to go through a process to see if they can even understand and follow a process. There's all these little things that we never talk about that are there, and we go, it's not like we just go, hey, let's go on Craigslist and hire a guy.
Hey,
I
Jeff,
can easily. Sorry, I can speak to that at my level as I'm going through this right now.
Okay.
Realistically, yes, there is turnover always. We try to maintain the highest skill set level of people, and then we expect a certain level of churn in the lower skill set of people.
Okay.
We select from those lower skill set of people when they come in, because generally they're green or new. We train those up, choose the best of those, and help to try to give them a career path up to the higher skill sets. So you try to keep the people who are talented in the way that you need, and expect that there's always going to be some level of churn. Different people have different aptitudes at learning things, and you want to identify the people earlier on in the career that have the better chance to grow and help mentor and guide them through to that higher level, to give them also the, I guess, equivalent of brand loyalty and sticking with you, that you've helped bring them up to that level. You've given them the training. Others, granted, you may not invest as much time in because you don't see that in them. Maybe you were wrong, but you do have to make those calls.
That's going to be a little bit different too. I think at the large size that you're at. I think in a large size business like that, you can afford that. I think some of the smaller MSPs, I'm not sure that they can afford those types of things. So yeah, Barry and Chad, can either one of you speak to that?
Yeah, we've been actually, what we do, this is part of why I still maintain our retail presence. We hire people for the bench. We put them on the bench. They're not allowed to touch any business computers for a year.
Okay.
Is our rule. And you have to hire slow and fire quick. If somebody is detrimental to your business, you get them out the door as fast as possible. And I don't mean, their skill set's not where it needs to be. I mean like attitude and everything else. And then our goal is maybe not quite to the same extent that Scott's able to do it, but we're trying to, build a miniature version of that where we do work people up to higher positions. And our thought process is that if they can help us grow the business, then we're growing the business, and we can then add more people in underneath and go from there. We've also found that as far as aptitude, like, I'm not sure if, Scott, are you talking technical versus sales, or are you talking just in the technical realm?
Generally, we actually have, because of the size we're at, we have two different paths that they can go to. So
Okay.
There is the technical path, but there is also more of, we call it an engagement manager, but there's more of a management of the customer relationship. When you have a large, any large customer that you can't be with all the time, you need someone who can dedicate more of their time to it, and it won't necessarily be the technician. And when you're busy growing the business and guiding things where you need to go, it can't necessarily always be you. So someone who can be there with them, go through the reports on a monthly basis to show them what's been done, how we fix things, any optimizations or different things in the network that we would like to perform to start projects, help them manage any change process when they're adding things to their network, that type of role. So there's it's a technical role, but with less of a technical person.
We don't have enough room for multiple of those. So for us, that path, just if that's the way they're going, then it's almost like not so much firing them, but maybe finding them a better option elsewhere. With the technical side, though, I have found that some people are firefighters and some people are very good fire prevention officers. And so what I do is, it's very important to identify those people, because if you tell somebody who is a firefighter to sit and proactively do stuff all day, you won't get the results you're expecting. Likewise, if you tell somebody who's very proactive that they have to respond to fires, you'll see all their hair fall out and they'll become very stressed, and things will just be bad, because that's not what they are built to do either. And that's been what we have been able to do, is build that side of it up.
And for us, that actually coincides to our silo type of scenario of there is a knock and there's a TAC. The Technical Assistance Center, where you've got the people who really have to jump in there and fix things, and you've got the knock who's more monitoring it, taking the documentation that the TAC has generated on these new problems and bringing it down to a level that then the knock is able to consistently do these things. So it's just a different size of scale there.
Right. So Marvin, now from your standpoint, you had at a point in your business, you had hired a couple people that were working for you. Now you do it more of an outsource, where you have vendors and independent contractors that do some of the work for you. Because obviously the reality is, and we all know this, not every one of us can do everything. We get that. And there are some things that you have to hire somebody to do. It's just like my website. I would not, even though I play around with it, I would not want to build my website from the bottom up. I'm going to hire somebody else to do that and to be able to take care of that for me. So what was your process, and why did you go from a couple employees down to, hey, I'm going to do it myself? Because there had to be some options in there where you're like, hey, I like it better this way than I did this way.
Well, for me, what happened as I was trying to scale my business, because at the time I thought I was going to, have a retail store, I was going to have a service department, I was going to have a business, serviced, but down here in my area, I found that the clients I was getting, that's not what they wanted. So I ended up building relationships with clients that I just, they were my clients for life, in a sense. I've had the same clients, 15, 18 years. I brought on the techs as a way for me to have the tech start supporting those clients. I would go out and get more clients. But I ran into, I don't know if they're all problems that were specific. A lot of them were the same general problems that we have. Some techs didn't want to work, techs didn't want to grow. Some techs had trouble dealing with stuff. And I think it was around 2007 and 2008 is when remote support really started to take off in this area. So I found that I could actually do more remotely than my techs could. And so for a tech that I had that, was sitting around in the office half a day not doing anything, it didn't make sense for me to pay him to be sitting there doing nothing. And I wasn't going to really force them to grow. So I just scaled back, and I did whatever I could remotely, and was basically in a holding pattern of thinking I would basically reposition my business to once again hire techs. But then I found out that, what? I'm at a good level with my customers. I'll still grow, one customer a year or whatever the number is. I'll hire independent contractors to support, I've got customers with offices outside of my city. So I've got techs in those other cities that can go on site if I need to. But it's the same, deal I think that everybody has. I just wasn't in a position where I needed to have those techs anymore to do what I was doing. At the time I thought that I did. I would send the techs out. Customer didn't really want to talk to the tech. They still wanted to talk to me. So I got to those hurdles, and I probably could have overcome them, but at that time I found other ways to support those customers with less resources and with better efficiency, automation, managed services. So I did all of that stuff and got rid of the techs.
Oh, you use the M word.
So how do you identify and find those independent contractors that you're using?
Most of them I have basically found, I don't want to say trial and error, but I would basically, look them up through I can't say vendor names, right? So there are directories of where you can find techs. And basically I go through those directories, I look for certain criterion, call them up, talk to them, try to figure out if they match what I need and if they can do that and if they're okay with it, if we can come to an agreement. We'll try an engagement or two, and if it works out, then it works out. And I think it's worked out for everybody that I have now. I've had for years, and I think there's only one or two that I don't call anymore just because I found out that they couldn't do, or they were unwilling to handle my customer the way I wanted them to, as opposed to the way that they wanted them to. So it's been a process. I mean, it takes time. You got to do it pretty much the same way you do an employee. You got to interview them. You've got to try to find a way to figure out what their skill levels are, what their customer service level is. Are they personable? Will they represent you the right way? That's pretty much the same thing, I think.
I think there's a difference. Go ahead, Chad.
I just wanted to touch on, you were mentioning the managed services a little while ago there, Marvin, and one of the things I wanted to touch on with the independent versus the business, when doing managed services specifically, is agreements and your service level agreements specifically. We have an independent contractor that we use for something, and we have a contract with him for this thing, and he has SLAs in the contract, which I thought were kind of funny when I read them. And we needed to engage with him for various reasons, so it doesn't matter that they're there or not. But he has never once met those SLAs, ever, because his SLA says he'll reply within 2 hours or something. But one time he was doing a 3-day event somewhere, and he wasn't available for 3 days. Another time he was just busy. And I mean, I have to resort to underhanded, cell phone calling, things I don't want happening to me in order to track him down. So when you're doing your managed services agreements, forgetting about automation for a second, because I completely understand wanting to reduce workload by not having to patch every workstation. I get that. But when you're talking managed services in more of a grander scope, what are you promising, and are you able to deliver that, or are you falling flat?
I promise nothing.
You promise nothing. Okay. Well,
Let me rephrase that. I mean, I promise to support them, but I will not commit to a response time of 1 hour, 2 hour, 4 hours.
That's just not in your agreement at all.
It's just not. Basically, everything is best effort.
Okay.
And
to be fair, Chad, we don't do that either, actually.
Really?
Yeah, so one of the problems that we run into, and this is where we find that we're going into these environments where it's sometimes larger than us, where they have these SLAs. The SLAs are so ridiculously high so that the organization can meet them, that they're not acceptable to the client. So we prefer to have a situation where our contracts are fluid, and our clients have the ability to, if we're not meeting their own SLA, right? Everybody's SLA is different, and the situation is different. If my server's down, I want somebody to answer in 5 minutes. But if I need some help putting a signature on my Outlook, maybe I can wait a couple of hours.
What about just response? Like our service level agreements aren't so much based around time of resolution. It's based more on that touch, and I think that's extremely important in any size business, is just acknowledgement of the issue, saying that, yes, we've received your request, and yes, we're going to work on it. We don't just like the automated email bounce either. Like, we like an actual person to say, okay, Mr. Mrs. Customer, we're aware of the problem, and we have somebody working on that. Now, if that's somebody, like if you said it's adding a signature, somebody may not be working on it that second. And if it's more important, somebody may really be working on it and get pulled off something else. But that acknowledgement and telling them, look, we're not going to leave you sitting there stressed out wondering what's going on, has been a really important thing for us, especially in closing deals.
But that's an internal process. Has nothing to do with your contract with them. Either you do it or you don't.
Well, having to go through this every day myself, I've got a couple of curiosities around this, because I work in SLAs. 40 or so customers we manage, 3 of them have SLAs. SLA would mean that there's a monetary penalty that you do if you do not meet it. All of our customers have SLOs, service level objectives. We have an objective to do this for you in this period of time. No monetary penalty for not meeting that. So are we talking that there is, in the contract, are you writing actual penalties then against these things? And if you do not meet them, then you have to, you've got a penalty against it, and then do you report on these? Because SLAs aren't necessary for every customer. As I said, we've got 40, with 3 with real true SLAs.
Mm.
That's a good point. And as far as actually on the note of the cost, sometimes it's not worth if you breach by an hour and it works out to be pennies or dollars, it's oftentimes not worth it. We have a lot of customers that have connections with certain ISPs that seem to breach their uptime agreements a lot, and it takes an hour on the phone to get a refund of around $6. So, and that's I mean it's a fairly expensive connection, yeah. So the question then becomes, is the monetary penalty worth it? If the question is, do we automatically assign a monetary penalty? No. If somebody, if they were to say, look, your agreement says this, and yes, we would definitely compensate on that. But again, they're not written around guaranteeing a certain level of uptime or something like that. It's mostly based around response time. So if my wording that I use isn't standardized, and
well, we actually have 3 different types of SLAs as well for the different customers. Each customer has their own SLA. None of them are the same across. In one case, it's getting a part on site within a very specific time after a deemed failure. In another, it's having a tech on the line with the customer within 10 minutes of a breach. In the third, it is actually a resolution time. If we do not resolve within this period of time, fail.
Hey, now, Scott, do you guys actually charge more for that, though? That sounds to me like a premium customer.
Because they are an SLA and because there are penalties against it, you are charging more because you're taking on a risk. You're taking on the risk premium. Instead of them being at risk that something is wrong in their network, you are now taking that risk and saying that they will get this monetary penalty. And in our case, it's not a percentage or anything. Generally, it's a fixed amount per failure. In the on-site for 4 hours, it is actually a here you go. This is a percentage of if we fail this many times. But in many others, it's if you don't meet this objective, is this lump sum that is meant to penalize us for not meeting their requirement.
And I think that's a good way, because you cannot, I think this goes with any business, you cannot lump every customer into a standard cookie cutter approach. And I think that's what a lot of us, we've been told for years, this is what we need to do. Here's how we need to scale. Here's how we need to grow our business. Here's how many employees we need to have. And the reality is, if you treat your business depending on the different customers that you have and set up your contracts between those customers on a separate basis, that makes much more sense to me. Because then if you need to hire somebody that's going to be sitting around and making sure that that person is taking, or that company is taken care of if something does break, because of the SLA you have with them, that makes perfect total sense. And I like these server level or service level objectives, or here's what
That's standard.
Yeah,
what we intend to do.
Yeah, exactly. And I laugh because in my contract, it's a one-page contract, and like I said, mostly residential. But when I have the customer flip it over, and I still use paper, when I have the customer flip it over and sign it, they always ask me, "Hey, do I have to read this whole thing?" I said, "No." I said, "You know what? It just says you're giving me permission to work on your computer." And I joke on a lot of these shows, and I say, really, what my contract says is I'm not responsible for anything. If it blows up, I'm not responsible. Whatever, because I'm going to give my best effort, and I know the type of job that I do, and that's why people come back to me. But the reality is, I can't control. I get some stuff that's weird sometimes that, I've never had anything really bad happen, but just in case. So, as far as now, Pierre, you haven't said anything this whole conversation, and do you have anything to add to this conversation about?
I thought that we muted his mic. I thought that was part of the plan here.
Oh, we can't hear you.
That's why he hasn't said anything.
Might have been talking.
We've been talking the whole time.
So, Corey, do you have anything from your business standpoint? Obviously, you're in a software business. Yours is a little bit different. But what do you see your customers talking about? What the things that we're talking about today?
I mean, a lot of my customers do what Marvin does, where they pair up, they meet each other. Sometimes I make those introductions, and a lot of my customers do what Barry and Chad do. It's a mix and match for sure. In terms of, I want to ask Chad something, because he mentioned previously that he was dealing with a contractor or a fellow business owner, I can't remember which, who had an SLA but was at a conference and wasn't able to meet his SLA because he was an independent. So I guess my question for you, Chad, is why are you still working with him, and did he pay any sort of penalty for that SLA?
Great question. And the penalty came down to what the contract's worth, the amount of time it would have taken to get it, so I absolved on that. And why I'm still working with him, well, I'd have to actually give more information than I want to about it in order to tell you that. But let's just suffice to say that for what he does, he has a fairly unique skill set, and the clients that I have him working with really like him. The only downside is the fact that his contract is hilarious, and I don't know why he even bothers with it, but be that as it may, that's where we're at.
Because he's like most other people, and he copied and pasted it from somebody else, and that's what it said.
Right.
That's another good point. Make sure you guys have a lawyer read your contracts. You want to make sure they're enforceable at the end of the day.
It makes sense. You should read it yourself too, just to make sure it makes sense.
I've done that several times. Probably every 6 months I peruse through mine just to look at it and say, is there? And the other thing too is when it comes down to a contract, a lot of times there's things that have happened to me between myself and a customer where I go, ooh, I probably should have that in the contract in case this happens again. So to now nothing's 100% protection, but it gives me kind of that that layer between me and the customer, just in case something weird happens. Now, Barry, let me ask you a question, because talking about this and being available and making sure that you're there on time and doing all these different jobs, can you tell us about the story of what you were doing last night?
Yeah. So we have a client. They're a good client because they pay their bills. They're a bad client because they don't listen to us. And they had a server crash this weekend. So one of the advantages to being a team of people is that we were able to take shifts over the weekend and have somebody there through the entire time during the recovery process. So my, being at the top, you get the bottom, and I took the night shift last night. So I was there from about 6 o'clock last night until 6 o'clock this morning, and that's it's mountain time. So it was just a few hours ago.
So there's still things that we all deal with in our business that are not all rosy like we paint it with, even the things we have set up in our businesses. I guess my point is there's a lot of things that happen that are outside of our control. Now, to be honest with you, had that been my customer, I would have said, yeah, we'll see you on Monday morning. But that's just me, and because my customers don't expect me to be there on the nose for a lot of that stuff, it's like, yeah, whatever. And if they don't like it, hire somebody else.
That's about defining your market, though, right? That's
exactly. That's true. Yeah, absolutely.
And being upfront with your customers, letting them know what services you can offer, what services you can't. That's crucial.
And the other thing I used to do a lot of times, and I don't think anybody's talked about this, is I used to make my customers buy, when I was doing more businesses, I would make them actually buy service level contracts for software, so that if I couldn't get in there and fix it right away, I actually had somebody that I could talk to, and they could usually get in there, fix the problem, because I don't understand every piece of software out there, what it does. I can manage a database and all that kind of stuff, but as far as, hey, if something's not working correctly, and you're going to ask me about QuickBooks or whatever, any of these other, Peachtree, or I have no clue, nor am I going to take the time to sit down there and learn that stuff, nor would I hire somebody to sit down there and learn that one piece, because it's such a small piece of the pie, when you can spend money on the company that's actually put together the software to be able to take care of that quickly, because obviously you want your accounting software probably to work on a daily basis.
That's in our contracts. So our contracts require that they have maintenance and support on their software and on their hardware. And that's the situation that we ran into last night. This client is choosing to run equipment that is beyond its reasonable lifespan, and they're paying for it. So it's outside of their contract, and they're paying time and materials for this work.
Time and a half, I hope.
That's in the contract too.
All right, so let me ask you a question, because I've seen this from both sides of the fence, whether it be and Marvin, you talked to this too, whether it be a mid-sized business or a small independent tech, where they will come in and whatever happens between them and the customer, that person ends up leaving, and you have no way, because there's no documentation to get to the things you need to get to, whether it's administrative passwords, email passwords, different passwords for the different accounts they have. Now, because I've seen it from both sides, where I've seen businesses, even good-sized businesses, that are poor at documentation, and they go, yeah, sorry, you're on your own, and they just fly and leave the customer hanging, which I think is a disservice, to be honest, and I think it's wrong. But how do you guys deal with that type of stuff as far as documentation for your businesses?
That was something I actually wanted to ask Marvin about. Not about his documentation particularly, but about if he gets run over by a bus tomorrow. Sorry, Marvin. I hope that doesn't happen. I'm knocking on wood for you. I understand that you have other techs that you can get to help you out, but what's the process for going from getting run over by a bus and then your customers having support?
Well, down here it'll be a big van. Well, now again, that depends on the customer, because for my business customers that we are supporting in a true fashion, there's going to be a couple of different things. One, they're going to have all the documentation that they need in terms of administrative passwords to their servers, their switches, routers, all of that stuff, and it'll probably be with an owner or something in a safe place. I also have a copy that I keep here at my office because I know that not every owner remembers that they put their secret packet of information in a certain drawer in a certain office, and they'll forget where it is, or they'll toss it or something. And then I have, for certain clients, the backup tech that I have for me will have a copy as well. And so there's those 3 copies, as well as if they have the admin password to get into the server, there's subfolders that they can go to and find all the information that they need. So that's what I do. A lot of my customers are their own worst enemies, where they won't keep the documentation, they won't care about the documentation, they just want to know it works. And so I just have to do my best to put my backups in place for all of that. The other thing that I do is, hopefully, one of the owners will remember the one main password they need, so that when somebody comes in after me, and it's not just getting hit by a bus or a hurricane or something. It's, if the customer and I have a bad relationship and I fire them, they fire me, whatever happens, the next person or the next company that comes in to support them, I want them to be able to log in to the network and look at it and go, oh, okay, this is pretty standard, and they just be ready to go. They're not going to find anything MacGyvered. They're not going to find anything, what in the world was he thinking? Everything's going to be pretty much above board, standard practices, hopefully best practices that they can get in and just simply, for the most part, just take over and not really have to change much.
Now let me ask you. Now, Chad, let me ask the question on the other foot. As a business owner, if you get run over by a bus, do you really think that your business is going to, the people that work for you are going to carry on? In number 2, why would you care? Because you'll be dead anyways.
I really don't, because I will be dead. But no, actually, some family actually works in the business, so I do care in that regard. And no, I think the business would change the focus pretty quickly because of the people I have set up left in charge. But everybody who's currently working in the business would, and everyone who's a customer, is what I'm trying to say, would be supported. We have a standardized documentation system we use internally. Now, unlike Marvin, we don't give out the secret packet. We talked about doing that, and the reason why we don't do that, and actually I shouldn't say that, for those large clients that are exclusions we talked about, they have the same administrative access that we do. For our clients where we do everything, the ones where we own the backups and we own the firewalls and all that kind of stuff, we don't give out the passwords unless they would like to pay more. And the logic behind that is that we're taking accountability for everything. They can't do anything. We give them access, they do something, they're going to have to pay, it'll be outside of the scope of the agreement. When I frame it that way, no one wants them. So we have those passwords, and in the event of something happening, anybody at my company could hand it over to the right person, the contact on file. It's not about keeping them from them, it's just about accountability for us.
Now, what happens if your whole company is in the Bahamas? No, I'm just kidding.
Hey, why are you picking on the Bahamas?
I'm just saying, Bermuda Triangle, whatever. Okay, no, and those are good points. And the point is, you try to protect yourself. You try to protect your customers as best you can. But the reality is, I don't know any business that's going to hit it 100% and have everything in place that's going to. We could sit here and talk about things of how they're going to work in best practices and all that kind of stuff. But the reality is, there's probably something we haven't thought of that could maybe happen, but the chances of that happening are not very likely in most of our situations.
Well, here's a scenario that I had to deal with just a couple of months ago, where I got a new client that was a not-for-profit, and they got into a situation where their provider stopped taking their calls. Just literally decided they weren't going to support them anymore, and the best answer that they got was, yeah, you're too small for us. And what happened was, I went in to take over. I had some of the passwords, but I didn't have everything, and we ended up having to rebuild part of their network because we couldn't get all that information. And that's a situation where, that shouldn't happen,
right?
Especially for a not-for-profit. But that happens on both sides. There's a lot of independence, and one of the things that just annoys me is when an independent, that solo tech, in order to have job security, will keep every bit of information that he or she can, so that company needs them. That way they know that they can, bill, because that company has to call them. The problem is, I've also seen that with some larger companies where they do that because, I think in the same vein as what Chad said, where they don't want the customer to mess anything up or do anything, so they don't give them the access. I fought with that too. I mean, I didn't want to give customers access to stuff because, somebody goes in and tries to install something and, blows up their machine or installs a virus, and then they got to call me to fix it. Now I just look at it as, you know what? If that happens, you're getting charged the advanced, network fee.
Which is the problem, because our agreements with these customers say that we take care of everything included in their flat rate, and we're accountable for everything. And that's exactly what I tell them. We're going to have to write a clause in saying if you break it, you bought it, kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
Which is, and they just, I have not actually had anyone say okay. They just say no, we don't. No, that's fine. That's fine.
We have some that do want to have access, and as a business owner, I understand that. I understand that they want to have a hold of some of that. But in those cases, what we do is we set up a unique, and which is best practices anyways, set up a unique administrator account for them. We have auditing, so we know that they have done something or they have changed something. We have proof that it's happened, and we can then go back to them with our contract in hand and state, you made this happen. There's going to be some extra charges associated with it.
Okay. I think unless anybody's got some ending comments, we're actually at the hour mark, a little bit over the hour, and I think we're ready to take a little break and go into the question and answer session. Does anybody want to end with anything before we do that? Everybody good? All right, we have a great panel, and this has been a great discussion, I think, on both sides of the fence. We've got Marvin B. from maninthevan.net and Barry Campbell from Brightlink Information Systems, Chad Kemp from Fast Computers, Scott Young from Flexity, Pierre Roman from Microsoft, and Corey Fruitman from Instant Housecall. All right, we're going to take a quick 5-minute break, and if you guys want to watch use the Segue tab at the top, and you can watch the video there. Make sure you log into the chat room, and we will come back and start asking those questions, and we'll get those rolling. Thanks.